It's funny because if you'd have told me 2 days ago, before I started researching all of this, if someone would have said, yeah, my girlfriend said she got chlamydia from her guinea pig, I would have been like, no, liar.
Weird. Shut up.
Impossible. Yeah. Turns out it's totally true. So,
yeah.
Chlamydia.
I wasn't looking. I wasn't ready.
You're never ready for chlamydia.
Ugh.
Just hits ya.
Today we're talking about chlamydia in all of its wonder in various forms. And you'd be surprised at how much chlamydia there is out there.
As it turns out, it's a lot. It's a lot of chlamydia. And you don't even know. You're surrounded by it. It's everywhere. Did you eat turkey for Thanksgiving? Did you?
Oh,
a lot of us did. I'm going to tell you something.
Oh, no.
Probably had chlamydia.
Have you eaten pork in the last few weeks? Chances are that pig you ate had chlamydia.
Did you know there are 2 threats to the wild koala population currently, okay? And there's not many wild koalas left, but do you know what's killing them? Climate change.
Wildfires.
Obviously, wildfires. But also, chlamydia.
Did you know that in 1929 and 1930, a global chlamydia pandemic rocked the parrot trade and caused at least 100 deaths?
Dangerous owning parrots. Dangerous owning any birds. Why? Infested with chlamydia. All of them. Do you ever watch Hey Arnold? We watched Hey Arnold.
Oh,
you remember Hey
yeah.
Arnold?
I don't remember this episode, though.
Well, you remember Arnold's pet pigeon, Chester? Chester was sick.
You're going to keep Chester? And cure him?
What do you think was wrong with Chester? I'll tell you.
Chlamydia! You know? All right. I'm seeing a trend here.
All your favorite animals, okay? Wild animals. Tortoises. Crocodiles.
You know, even amoebas. Yeah. Which is probably your favorite animal.
Frogs.
Yeah.
Koalas, obviously. Pets. Parrots. Guinea pigs. Cats. Dogs. Farm animals.
All
Sheep. Goats. Cows. Horses. Guess what all of them have?
Chlamydia. All right, so we've discovered that chlamydia is actually everywhere.
Yeah.
It's all around us. Mm-hmm. I feel like I live in a different world now. We're driving down the road, and we saw a hawk the other day, and I was like, I wonder if that has chlamydia, because there's a high probability it does.
Chlamydia is a bacterial infection. Okay, so it's caused by bacteria.
It's one of the most common STIs. It's, I think, the 3rd most common, but one of the highest incident rates. So tons of people get chlamydia every year throughout the world.
And really what you need is antibiotics to fix it. I mean, in pretty much all of these cases, right, you need antibiotics. But I did not realize before we started looking into this how prominent chlamydia is throughout the animal kingdom and how much chlamydia can be spread human to human and animal to human.
And, it's just a big swirl of chlamydia passing around. It's
everywhere.
It's called zoonotic diseases that can go from an animal to a person. And what I've read is that most species of chlamydia, I can't even say, most variants of chlamydia can be transmitted from animals to people, interestingly.
Which is pretty scary, actually. It's a scary place out there.
Yeah, it is.
Chlamydia running wild.
Thankfully, I think a lot of the chlamydias that spread from animals to people don't spread very well between people. Because we have our own chlamydia that spreads like wildfire between us. Yeah. And like you said, it's a bacterial infection, so for most people, it's not that big of a deal. As an STD goes or an STI goes, it's one of the best ones to get because you take some treatment, goes away.
Yeah.
For the most part.
But if you don't take that treatment,
it'll mess you up.
Bad consequences.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what's happening to the koalas. Before we get to that, most people watching this are probably thinking about a very particular kind of chlamydia, and this is one that spreads between people. I don't know how to pronounce it. You're the one that looked at it, right?
Yeah. I think there are 2 when I was reading that commonly spread, like person to person. But I will say, I looked at many, many articles, and I don't know if you found this too, but there are a lot of different types of chlamydia. More than I imagined that there would be. And it varied, the article that I was looking at, how many it said that there were. Some articles were like, there's only 3 types of chlamydia. That's a lie. There's only 4 types of chlamydia. That appears to be a lie.
I think 7 plus 9?
Yeah, the NIH article that I ended on said 9. And I think that was as of 2011. So there might be more now, to be honest.
Yeah.
Lots of chlamydia.
And, one thing I read is that it's the chlamydia is increasing its, what do they call it? Host range or something. So it's actually a disease that's spreading in the number of animals that it's impacting and just the quantity. So that's fun.
The
growing chlamydia issue.
It's funny because If you'd have told me 2 days ago, before I started researching all of this, if someone would have said, yeah, my girlfriend said she got chlamydia from her guinea pig, I would have been like, no, liar.
Weird. Shut up.
Impossible. Yeah. Turns out it's totally true. So there are basically 2 main chlamydia infection types, it seems like. One of those is the STD that you probably associate with chlamydia when you hear the word chlamydia. Mm-hmm. And then there is another group of diseases that all silo together that are these other 8+ other types of chlamydia.
Well, and so the way I was looking at it initially, and I think this actually breaks down between all sorts of species too, is that there are 2 large families of chlamydia and the way they impact their host. You have the STI conjunctivitis type of chlamydia that will impact your eyes and your reproductive organs. Yeah. And then you have, and that's what most people think of as chlamydia. You get chlamydia, you've got an STI. But then there's an entire other branch of chlamydia that also impacts humans and other animals that causes respiratory issues and pneumonia.
Yes.
So throughout this, we're going to be talking about that. But in humans, the STI chlamydia is trachomatis, and the respiratory chlamydia is pneumoniae. So I think root word pneumonia, because that is one of the potential complications, is getting pneumonia and severe respiratory distress.
And what I was reading is the pneumoniae is in a group of diseases that cause that kind of thing. So trachomatis is in a league of its own.
It's sort of unique. Because of its impact on specific, like what it does to ulcerative issues and like.
And I think how it spreads. So even though a lot of the koala chlamydia has been spreading, which is not trachomatis, has been spreading via koalas having sex with each other. Classic, right? It can spread through other bodily fluids. Yeah. Whereas trachomatis is specifically a sexually transmitted infection.
Yeah. So it has like a very specific vector versus the pneumoniae or the pneumonia type, the respiratory type that is a little bit more diverse in the way it gets around.
That's at least what I thought I gathered from the way that they had split them out.
Fascinating. Dude, we're not actually going to go into a lot of, this isn't really a thing about STDs and impact, but I mean, look it up, but it's like weird discharge, burning sensation when you're using the bathroom, that kind of stuff.
You can find stuff about we're not, the STI chlamydia anywhere. We're not going to talk to you about that because this is not that kind of channel. This is a weirder channel than that, and this is where we talk about the chlamydia that infects all of the animals that surround us every day, not where we talk about STI chlamydia. We're here to talk about the other family.
That's all I was going to say, was just stuff like that. And if you don't, you said what happens if you don't treat it is it can lead to infertility, basically. And I think that's one of the issues that's plaguing the koala community, and why they're being led towards extinction is partly because they have untreated chlamydia that's causing them to become infertile. Do you want to talk about the different types of animal chlamydias?
Yeah, there are a lot of them. I think for us, we're focusing on the ones that can be transmitted from animals to humans. So there are a lot of chlamydias that are transmitted animal to animal, and we're not really going to talk about those. But I will say something that was interesting for me when I was looking at different lists of things was that I would be reading about a chlamydia and I'd be like, oh no, this is just animal to animal. We're okay. This one doesn't go to humans. And then I would search it just to be sure, So I'd search it separately from the article that I was reading, and I'd be like, oh no, it has actually
that's why
gone to humans.
I think there's some that primarily transfer between humans and people, and like a much more. What did I say? Humans and people? Yeah. But there are a couple that I think are more likely responsible. But what I read in the end when I was done with my research is that like most chlamydias can transfer to a person with enough contact.
Yeah. There are just some that it's more likely than others. Yeah. And frankly, there are some that are kind of funnier than others. Not that chlamydia is ever funny, because it's not really. It's a disease. But there are some that are more rare, and you'd have to have a very specific set of circumstances to get chlamydia from an animal, versus others that you really just have to be in the vicinity and you might catch it. Primarily, we're going to talk about 4 different types of chlamydia that has been known and scientifically proven to spread from animals to humans. Okay. 2 types that are very unlikely, but that have in fact spread from animals to humans, are C. felis, and that affects mostly cats, although there was a study in China recently that also showed that it affects dogs as well, so domesticated pets. And then C. cavii, and that one is a guinea pig disease.
Which can also spread to other household pets as well.
Yes. It's just more, it's most commonly associated with guinea pigs. And I think the moral of the story with all these chlamydias is that don't think that chlamydia can't infect something, because just when you think it's only in the guinea pigs, it's when it'll get proven wrong and you find it in a human or you'll find it somewhere else. So chlamydia is highly infectious and it really gets around. And then the other two that we're going to talk about are C. abortus, and that's primarily found in sheep and goats, although affects
pigs
other...
and cows as well in large numbers.
I don't know. All the articles that I read said that it affected primarily sheep and goats. And there's a different one that is really common in swine. And then C. cetacea, which affects birds.
Yeah, and that's one that we're going to end up probably spending a little bit more time on.
So felis is primarily transmitted via close contact with infected cats. And like a lot of these, the cats will show some signs of conjunctivitis. So basically the cats get pink eye.
Pink eye, yeah. I kept on forgetting what conjunctivitis was, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's your eyes getting gross.
And then that causes weeping, and then if you come into contact with the fluids that are infected, that's when you might get C. felis.
I think that's also, one of the primary transmission avenues for a lot of livestock to humans as well, because I was reading it was similar in pigs, is a lot of conjunctivitis disease that was being spread from pig to pig and then from pig to people.
I think it's a pretty common spreading mechanism. It is really unusual. So I think for a while people were getting, not that this was ever widespread, but for a minute people were getting really nervous about it because they were finding it more commonly in stray cats than in cats that live in a house. And one of the reasons that they think that was happening is that stress makes chlamydia worse. So
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if the animal is stressed...
Oh, the animal itself living on the street being stressed out...
Yes.
...increases their chlamydia risk.
Yeah. Okay. And they think that that's because stress causes a decrease in the immune system. And then that allows the chlamydia to run rampant.
Well, because your body can fight off chlamydia on its own. It's hard, but it's a bacterial infection that you can fight.
Right.
If any way that you knock down your immune system makes it makes you more susceptible. To the point that a lot of people getting chlamydia from animals are immunosuppressed or immunocompromised. It's a much greater risk for these people than just like the general population.
And that's a good point, because what I was reading about felis is that the only two cases that they have proven were ever specifically C. felis were highly immunocompromised people. And both were cured with antibiotics. So not super exciting, but it can be really dangerous, because I think the problem with this, and what I was reading with not just felis, but any chlamydia disease coming from animals, is that the symptoms mirror other things. So it's really hard to be able to tell that what it is the chlamydia. And it's really hard then to get people the right antibiotics.
And the only way to, what I was reading, to determine if you have chlamydia is to basically find the bacteria in your body. Maybe I'm misquoting the articles wrong, but you have to basically detect the bacteria. Otherwise, the symptoms are just symptoms, and your body doesn't create certain, markers to let a scientist know. You have to find the bacteria.
And the symptoms really mirror other respiratory illnesses. So they're going to go to anything before they're going to go to chlamydia from animals. It's so unusual.
To the point that some people have died from chlamydia, like pneumonia, thinking that it was some sort of viral infection, because you don't treat viruses and bacteria the same way. You can still give somebody fluids and care in a hospital, but you're not beating the root cause, and that could lead somebody to dying, and it has.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, sure, this isn't COVID level or even flu levels of people dying from a disease, but it's kind of weird to think that it's out there. And this is the first time I've heard about it.
And this was one of the things that I read too, was what makes it hard for doctors to identify that people have zoonotic chlamydia is they think it's something else. It's really unusual that this would happen to someone. And then because of that, they think it may actually be underreported how many people have it. And they just assumed that the person had a virus and passed from a virus when in actuality it could have been something like this.
Absolutely.
Which is really scary.
That is.
But anyway, C. felis doesn't affect that many cats. It's, I guess, 2 to 3% of healthy cats overall. So whether it's an indoor or outdoor cat, about 3%. Well, that's a lot of cats, though, right?
That's a lot. Consider how many cats are in the United States. It's a lot of cats.
A lot of them have chlamydia. Yeah. But it's up to 30% of cats with conjunctivitis. So if your cat is showing signs of having pink eye, just be careful, wash your hands. Mm-hmm. And if you're immunocompromised, maybe if there's a way for you not to be the person taking care of that animal for that time period, it's probably a good idea.
Just in general, if you're immunocompromised animals, and what I saw with this research, animals and pets in general around people, it's just a recipe for disease. So just be careful.
That's all I've got about felis. The next one is C. I think it's actually KVI. I might have mispronounced it before. It's really hard. These are hard to pronounce.
Yeah, we don't know. Just yell at us in the comments if we're doing it wrong.
So this one affects guinea pigs.
Actually, it's KVI. Sorry, go ahead.
I did look it up though, and I'm
fine.
trying. Okay, it's just
fine.
It's hard to get it through my head when I look at it, and I think it's said some different way. But anyway, so I thought when I looked up CKVI, because I saw it early on, and I was like, guinea pigs with the chlamydia, crazy. And I thought it couldn't pass to humans because it was on the list as something that only affected guinea pigs. Well, that's not true. That's not true. And apparently, at some point, 3 adults in the Netherlands ended up infected after they were in contact with. Hold on.
Sorry.
In 2017.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh.
Wow.
Yeah. So in 2017, 3 adults in the Netherlands were in contact with a guinea pig that was sick with chlamydia, and all 3 of them ended up getting CKVI from the guinea pig that they were in contact with, and they all got really, really sick because this is so rare. It's very unusual. I mean, how many people have guinea pigs anyway? And then how many people
have guinea pigs with chlamydia?
Right.
More than
you think.
No.
You have to be. This isn't one of those things where it's like you're just around them or you're breathing in their
dust.
Maybe.
Yeah.
You actually have to be in contact with the mucus, they think, that's being produced by the guinea pig that's
sick. You kiss
sick.
a little guinea pig on the face or whatever, and before you know it. Yeah, no, that's serious.
Yeah. So 2 of them ended up on ventilators in the ICU and almost died. So all 3 of them eventually did recover, but it required pretty intense hospitalization. All 3 of them actually ended up hospitalized, and then the 2 ended up in the ICU.
What we're talking about is the ones that are impacting people like this are the people that are being impacted by respiratory illness.
Yes.
Right? That seems to be the dangerous component. The other one is going to mess your life up and hurt, but this is the one that's going to kill you, is when it gets into your respiratory.
Yeah, absolutely, because it causes pneumia.
Yeah.
And then you end up in a really rough spot, which is how these people ended up with the guinea pig disease.
Speaking of guinea pigs, by reference earlier about like eating pork that is probably infected with chlamydia, recent studies showed that 80% of pigs in domestication have chlamydia, and that actually only 13% of feral pigs have chlamydia, meaning that, and I saw these studies that kept on kind of hinting towards, collective situations increasing the amount of chlamydia. 20% of corvids in a Swiss study showed that they had chlamydia, while only 6% of raptors do. And that makes perfect sense in my mind if I think about that, because you've got crows that are very social and they hang around in large murders. Well, like 1 in 5 of those crows probably have chlamydia, versus the raptors that are usually solitary or they're only hanging out with 1 or 2 other birds, less chlamydia.
Yeah.
I also saw a study that said, and I didn't see what type of chlamydia these were, but there was a study in a mountainous region in China that showed that 50% of their cows had chlamydia. And that's an interesting point for me, because it's sort of between the factory farming situation of the pig study and a wild situation of the feral pigs, because these were small-scale farmers, normal fields. You're not talking like a bunch of cows in a cage. You're talking cows grazing on a mountainside.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of cows in concentration, and you've got domestication. but it's not the same as the factory, and then the numbers are lower. So everything
Yeah.
I see indicates concentration, and then probably less sanitary conditions leading to more chlamydia.
Yeah.
And leading to the point that a lot of our food supply is chlamydia infected. Granted, it doesn't pass by eating it like that, so I say that with a caveat, but it makes you think for a second, like, what are we doing?
It's kind of gross,
You know?
still.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing that might factor in there too is the stress issue.
Oh, for sure.
Everything that I read was saying that stress, whether in any animal, so whether that's human or whether that's a farm animal, stress makes chlamydia worse and it makes you more likely to get it.
Yeah.
So, and less likely to recover from it. So that might
That's
be
great.
one of the reasons why the factory
That makes
farms
perfect
are
sense.
really high in chlamydia rates, whereas wild animals less so. They're kept in these super tight conditions. They're right next to each other, and then they are stressed out.
Inbred to a degree, where you have a wild population of animals that are going to have more natural immunities when they're just kind of dispersed among themselves versus a bunch of pigs that are like genetically similar in a massive cage, stressed out, put in like boxes. It's horrible, honestly. Yeah.
There's another reason. Do you want to talk more about pig chlamydia?
That was pretty much all I had, but that was all I had.
Okay, because I think that actually segues really well into C. abortus, which is
I thought that's why I threw this in.
Yep, and that's the sheep and goat primarily. It's hard because we say this stuff, but it's not really that only sheep and goats can get infected with C. abortus. It's just that it's primarily found in sheep and goats.
Yeah.
And it can affect other farm animals and it can affect humans. But one of the issues that I saw with that was that it, unlike the C. felis and the C. cavii, where you really have to be in direct contact with the fluids, for the C. abortus, you just have to be nearby. So
really,
yeah,
is it airborne?
It's
or is it particulates, kind of like aerosol
particulates
or something? Okay.
So it's if you inhale it, and it's very easily transferred from place to place. So essentially, there's risk for people that are even just living in the vicinity of these farm animals that are infected. You don't actually even have to be living on the farm.
Well, and so one thing I'm thinking with the word C. abortus, it's chlamydia that causes abortion in livestock, and I think it can impact people in the same way.
Yeah.
It causes them to miscarry. So when an animal, I think what I've read about C. abortus is that it can cause a miscarriage in an animal, and if you're anywhere near that when that happens, it can infect you. And if you're a pregnant individual, it could have dire ramifications on your life.
Yeah.
And so it's especially dangerous for people that are handling, because when an animal like that happens, there's a mess, and you've got to help them out somehow, you know. But then what you're saying, that you can just be in the vicinity, that's kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Super scary. So I read an NIH article about it, and they were saying the primary people that are at risk is like what you're saying. So veterinarians, so people that are
animal handling,
farmers, so people that are raising livestock, but that it could even be like, let's say you're married to a farmer and he or she comes home.
Oh, they have like stuff on their clothes.
And they have stuff on their clothes. You can get infected from that.
Because you don't need to be direct contact. You need contact with the, like, even secondhand contact with the animal.
Yep.
Okay.
It's really scary, actually. Yeah. And it leads to, like you were saying, for humans, it can be, I don't want to say easily, but much more easily than C. felis or C. cavii passed to humans.
Yeah.
And pregnant women are the people that are primarily at risk for this because it causes pelvic inflammatory disease, and then that causes late-term abortion, fetal abortion, which is really scary.
I didn't read this, but it makes me wonder, you know, as people become more industrialized in societies and they get further away from the farm, if that also has an impact on, like, increased infant mortality or decreased infant mortality rates. I
don't think it's super.
Miscarriages.
I didn't read that it was super common because your flock has to be infected, and at that point, you would be noticing, as a farmer, you would be noticing that your sheep are having a lot of miscarriages.
Yeah,
or
it would spread throughout multiple animals likely before it even got to you.
Yeah, but apparently the specific case that I was reading about, this farm had a couple of years of trouble with their sheep and hadn't realized and then hadn't given their sheep the appropriate antibiotics, and that's where it passed to the woman who eventually lost her unborn child.
That's sad.
Yeah, super sad. All right, so you want to move on to C. Sitachi?
So Chlamydia psittaci, or psittacosis.
It causes
psittacosis. The root word of psittaci or psittacosis is the genus or the family for parrots. It's also colloquially known as parrot fever. In the 1929s, I think it was called pigeon fancier's disease.
Pretty cool names, honestly.
Yeah. And that was actually a huge deal because what I read was that it is the most likely chlamydia to spread between all sorts of vectors, between birds, livestock, and people. Yeah. And that's a big deal, too, because when I'm saying that like 20% of crows have chlamydia, I didn't actually read what type they were talking about in that study, but if it's this type of chlamydia, that's a perfect vector to jump from farm to farm to farm, and then from those farm animals to people, or directly from birds to people, or from wild birds to like poultry industry.
Do you want to talk? I have something about the history of this disease. I don't know if you...
Do you want to talk about the great... Do you want me to go on about the great parrot pandemic?
I was hoping to go back to 1879.
Oh, let's take it back to 1879. Okay.
Do you go back that far?
No, that's before. I did read something about 1879, but I didn't go into detail.
Yeah.
The parrot fever pandemic was 1929, so let's take it back.
Yeah, so all the way back to 1879. In 1879, there were several pretty big outbreaks of C. psittaci, and this can be incredibly dangerous to humans. And I was shocked when I read this, but the outbreaks of this actually led to the creation of the National Institute of Health.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Parrot fever? Yeah. Oh, wow.
Right. This was before the big outbreak in 1929, but that was one of the precursors and is why we even have the National Institute of Health today, is that they were dealing with these outbreaks of bird disease, and they didn't know how to deal with it. Bird chlamydia created the National Institute of Health.
It's really not a joke. The psittacosis, without treatment, had a 15 to 20% mortality rate for people that caught it, which is massive.
Yeah.
It's bigger than almost any like commonly spread disease like flu or even COVID. Like those are nothing compared to psittacosis.
And that's pre-antibiotics, right?
That's pre-antibiotics. Yeah. With antibiotics, it's very treatable, but it still has killed people recently.
Yeah. It's hard to catch it. So even they might not know that you need those antibiotics.
Parrot fever actually was discovered and called parrot fever because they kept finding that basically during the Great Parrot Pandemic of 1929 and 1930, people were just falling ill and dying from pneumonia. Sometimes there's one example actually of the Rowe family outside of London where 3 of the 5 members died in a couple of days, and they had like 106-degree fevers, 104-degree fevers, and crazy like heart palpitations and stuff. And what they kept finding through these clusters of like mass mortality events in small environments is that the people recently bought a parrot that died, basically. So you're talking about like a time in history shortly after industrialization when people are traveling the world and moving goods around. Well, a big part of status would be having colorful birds as pets, or birds that then are being turned into garments or being plucked for feathers and stuff. So there's this parrot trade going on throughout the world, taking parrots from tropical regions and then transporting them all over the place, and then it was spreading this disease. At least 100 people were recorded to die, although the numbers are probably larger than that because of what you're saying, difficulty in diagnosing and identifying it as the parrot disease. These were just the obvious ones where it was like, hey, they had a parrot that died and then they started dying.
Yeah.
It's actually most commonly spread through like the feces and the urine of birds that you're inhaling, or just direct handling of a sick bird can give you psittacosis. I actually read one example of 2 people that dissected a dead bird that had it, and one of them died, and they both got severely ill, and that was in recent years.
Yeah. There was actually there was an outbreak back in 2018 too, so this is not a thing that only happened back in the early 1900s. It's things that are still happening today.
Yeah.
And I looked into how it can infect humans, and this one to me was interesting because it's the most widespread, the ways that it can move from bird, in this case, or animal, to human. So one was what you were saying. So inhalation of the bacteria, whether that's from dust or whatever you want to call like their fecal matter, dander, stuff like that. Or from their actual like respiration. Oh, okay. So if they are breathing and they're sick, or they cough on you. Do birds cough? I don't know if birds cough, but that can also get you sick.
I'm just picturing a sick bird, and I just felt really bad, like really a dying parrot.
It's really sad. So another way that it can infect you is bite wounds. So if a parrot bites you, which I recently saw something on Instagram where this person was like, "Oh look, I got bit by this parrot." No, not cute. Not cute. Not cute. Scary. Don't get bit by parrots. It's not a good idea. And then the third way is plumage handling, which is what you're talking about, and mouth to beak contact.
Well, what if you got to do what if you got to resuscitate your bird?
Don't put your mouth on your bird's beak. Okay? Don't do it.
How else are you going to resuscitate a dying bird? I honestly don't know.
I read that and I was like, who is beak contact?
That's so weird. Oh man. You actually saying that the 1879 bird pandemics caused the NIH to be formed is interesting because I read that 1929 pandemic caused a bunch of countries to completely shut off importation of birds and particularly parrots, except for scientific reasons. And then on top of it, Department of... Due to the 1929-1930 bird chlamydia outbreak, birds are now quarantined and observed through facilities that are monitored by the Department of Agriculture, and they have been ever since.
It's just that bird law in this country, it's not governed by reason.
There's no such thing as bird law.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
So now there's like a very strict like monitoring process for importing birds because of these pandemics, and they're trying to keep a handle on it. It's not just because people were dying from it, which does occasionally happen. I think it's about 100 to 200 cases are reported in the U.S. per year. That's the U.S. alone. It's small numbers, but it can be dangerous. But I think the bigger fear from the Department of Agriculture is the poultry industry. They don't want one more thing. They have to deal with bird flu, which spreads much more rapidly. You don't need the bird chlamydia on top of it because it's very dangerous, especially for birds. They're croaking left and right from it.
Right, because it causes
mass... squawking left and right from it.
Oh, no. Stop. That's terrible.
Okay.
Yeah, it can have a massive economic impact because you're talking about a disease that can affect birds being able to reproduce. It definitely kills a lot of birds if they don't catch it in time and they're not able to provide antibiotics to the birds. And then the potential for human transfer of disease is scary.
Yeah, it increases. It is thought that the psittacosis can spread from human to human, but it's not really proven, and it's not. If it happens, it's rare and more difficult. So it's mostly, again, a zoonotic disease.
What they call it, I think they call humans like end vectors or something in this process. So basically, if a human gets it, they're not going to spread it anywhere else. It's going to stop with them.
Yeah, it's not like designed to leave your body. It's really a bird disease that's kind of on you or in you by convenience.
Yeah.
I did read that in relationship to the 1929 pandemic that it was overblown in newspapers and created a massive scare. So it's only 100 people-ish that died from it, and newspapers just ran wild with it, being like, the birds are going to kill us all kind of thing. So it's in today's, if you read about it, there are a bunch of like things from NPR and the NIH talking about how this was an overblown pandemic that isn't a true pandemic in the sense that we understand it. Yeah. But it's not to say that it's like nothing or not dangerous or not interesting. Yeah. And it has ramifications. Like when we're talking about this in the age of COVID, where COVID is likely a zoonotic disease. I don't know if they've proven that yet, but there's so many things. Bird flu, they kill flocks of birds to stop it from spreading from birds to other birds, but also to stop it from getting to us. And so many of these are zoonotic. There's so many zoonotic diseases. We don't need one more thing. It's a constant struggle. It's kind of crazy reading this and thinking about like the frontline battle against pathogens.
Doesn't it give you, I was just thinking about this now, but like Alfred Hitchcock's movie.
Yeah, I did. I thought about that.
Doesn't it make you feel differently about that movie?
Yeah. Because it's not, the danger isn't them pecking you to death. It's hanging around and pooping on you, and you're going to get chlamydia or...
Or, I mean, they peck you and you might get it.
It almost seems like a metaphor then for things like this. There were bird panics. Yeah. There were mass people, like, hysteria around, like, birds killing people. Not in that way, but it makes you imagine that, right? I literally thought we should watch this because of researching the psittacosis.
Yeah. Yeah, it does give a different context to that movie.
Yeah.
And why people might be even more afraid of birds or why they pose an even bigger threat. If you get C. sitaci, and it goes untreated, so you're not given antibiotics right away.
Or not appropriate treatment.
Yeah, not appropriate treatment because they don't realize that you got the bird fever, the parrot fever.
Yeah.
It can cause actually some really horrifying consequences. So pneumonia, which is actually that result is what is known as parrot fever. So not just getting C. sitaci, but actually getting
all the way to
the
the pneumonia.
fever the pneumonia from it. Heart and liver inflammation.
I saw that.
You can get.
Can you get in brain inflammation?
Brain inflammation. Yeah. It can actually cause neurological problems. It can cause you to go deaf. It can cause you to have mental impairment. So it's scary. And then
I wrote down these things: sudden fever, headaches, nausea, vomiting, unproductive cough, myocarditis, which we already talked about, renal failure, arthritis, and septic shock.
Yeah, it causes all sorts of things and then ultimately can lead to death. And unfortunately, if it goes undiagnosed and you end up with severe illness and they don't know that this is what's causing it, 30% of people that end up with severe illness from it will die. Yeah,
that's wild to think about how high of the mortality rate it is without treatment. It's cool that we live, but it says, I read there's a cure rate of 95% today. Does that imply that 5% of people are uncured, either living with it, like impacting them, or did the 5% of people dying?
I think so.
I didn't, because they were different. They said 15 to 20% mortality untreated, and they said cure rate of 95% with treatment. So I'm a little unclear what that means, but it is not a disease that impacts a lot of people. And it is dangerous regardless if you catch it.
Depending on the study you were reading, too, it could just be that they don't know for the remaining 5%. Because a lot of times if people pull out of a study, they can't count it towards the cure rate, but they might still count. Depending on how far they got into the study, they might still count the person in it. So I don't know that it implies that 5% of people died from it, but it is possible to die from it today, even with all of the modern medicine.
Well, and what I said before, there are cases recently of people dying. There's somebody in, I think maybe it was Australia, that died from this because they thought it was COVID, and they didn't treat them right. So it's one of those things where like you need to get properly diagnosed in order to even have a chance of fighting it, because it is very dangerous untreated.
It's also one of those things where it feels important to me to know that this exists, because then you know if you are at risk for something like this. If you work at a pet store, if you're a veterinarian, then you might go in armed with additional information, where if you're having some of these symptoms and they are able to rule out things like COVID, the flu.
What about parrot fever? You could ask them.
Do I have parrot fever?
Yeah.
And you might.
And you might be saying to yourself, well, I don't work at an animal store. I'm not a veterinarian. I don't have any pets. I'm safe. That's not true, because there is a human-to-human spread. Remember when we talked about there are two primary types in human, the STI version and the pneumoniae version? The pneumoniae version is not as dangerous, does not have as high of a mortality rate as the psittacosis. But that is a human-to-human spread. It stays within our species for the most part, and that's a chlamydia that is respiratory that causes pneumonia and kills people. And it has some similar distressing issues. It's implicated in a whole host of inflammatory diseases. Maybe it's one of those things where a lot of inflammatory diseases are thought to be long-term effects from a short-term infection, but they can. It also apparently has like potential ramifications and connections to Alzheimer's disease. So like chlamydia, the non-STI chlamydia, the pneumonia-causing chlamydia, is spread between people, and it can harm you, and it can still kill you as well. It's called pneumoniae for a reason.
Yeah.
Because it can take you out. So I'm not saying like run away, there's chlamydia everywhere, but like, it's one of those things that's out there, and you don't have to be near animals to catch it. Interestingly enough, too, I read that they think pneumoniae came from frogs, and that it's no longer like the same disease it was, but it could be that it was never a human disease originally. It came from frogs, and now we're all passing chlamydia to each other because of the frogs.
I think a big takeaway here is that if you have a partner and they tell you that they have chlamydia,
don't immediately freak out.
Don't immediately think that it's an STI, because there are actually so many ways that someone can have chlamydia, and so many of them that have absolutely nothing to do with sex.
Do you think they tell people when they're diagnosing them that they have chlamydia pneumonia, or do you think they just say seek pneumonia to demystify it or to like remove that?
I bet you they tell them, because have you ever been tested for herpes before? they test
Maybe.
you for multiple strains of herpes, one of them which is sexually transmitted, and then
the other
others
one,
which are
yeah,
not.
You're right.
And they tell you on that, like, your
Yeah.
results from the individual herpes tests.
Okay.
Get your herpes test,
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. Do it. Anyway, yeah. Wait, so you're saying you think that they would break it out separately?
Yeah.
But they wouldn't even be testing for the STI if you have a respiratory infection, would they?
No, and
Yeah.
I think they would test for the STI separately. But then, I mean, I've been in a hospital setting before, and they don't always explain things particularly well. So you could go home,
Test chlamydia.
right, and you could tell your partner, "I have chlamydia," and they could legitimately get pretty upset with you.
Okay, if
but-
you have a respiratory infection, just work to the wise. Don't go home and tell your partner you have chlamydia. Say, I have a respiratory infection.
But we're always told, people are told, like,
Be
make
honest.
sure that your partner knows, like, make sure you protect your partner.
It's not the same, but they're going to catch it anyway because it's airborne at that point.
Well, depending on the one you got. If you got the guinea pig chlamydia and they didn't touch the guinea
Okay,
pig, then
all
you're
right.
okay.
I think we're getting down a rabbit hole, as it were. That probably has chlamydia.
Probably, honestly.
I mean, I feel like every animal I see now, I'm just wondering. But that's only one of many diseases too. You got mites, you got worms. Like it's a crazy place out there.
Lots of diseases. Be careful out
Anyway,
there.
do you have chlamydia?
Have you ever had
No.
chlamydia?
It's not. So that's another thing too. I actually want to say before we wrap this up. Like we're joking a lot about chlamydia. It sometimes it's very much not a joke. But also, I think it's one of those things where like I don't personally feel like we should like stigmatize people for having an STD or an STI. It's an infection because people interact with each other and people like get down. It's not a big deal.
Absolutely.
You should be protecting yourself as much as possible. But
Get
like
down.
What? I'm old. I'm a boomer. But it's it's one of those things where that's one thing that I really enjoyed about this research is when I first started I was in my immediate reaction was haha you can get chlamydia from a parrot, and at this point I'm like no, chlamydia is kind of, I'm going to say normal again. We always go back to this. Chlamydia is normal, but it demystifies it both as an STD and also as an infectious disease that can make you have respiratory issues. For me.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, definitely that. And I just had no idea it was this common.
Yeah.
And I had no idea there were this many different ways that it existed and different ways that it was transmitted between animals, between humans. I had no clue. I didn't know. Now I look at a field of sheep and it's different for me now.
They're so cute.
They're so cute.
Don't want to touch them anymore.
Probably chlamydia.
You used to want to like hug every animal. I don't think you do.
I don't want to hug the sheep anymore, honestly.
I actually wonder if we should feed the birds as much because then we got chlamydia crows in our backyard and the dogs are running around out there.
Don't touch their feathers.
Okay.
Don't have
They
any
poop
mouth
out there.
Don't have mouth to beak contact.
As long as they don't have psittacosis.
No mouth to beak for you. I think that's pretty much it.
Well, if you had fun talking about chlamydia with us today, hit the like button, subscribe. We're going to be doing all sorts of other zoonotic diseases as well as other topics.
Yeah, come along with us. Also, is there a topic that you're interested in that you don't want to do hours and hours of research on and that you would like us to do hours and hours of research on? Because we're willing to do it for you.
Slap it down below, and if we're curious enough, we'll do it.
Yeah, let's learn together. Also, did we get anything wrong? Is there anything that you know
Roast us.
about? Is there anything you know about chlamydia, animal or human, that we didn't cover that you think is interesting? Leave it in a comment down below.
We're going to have some chlamydia experts down there.
Sure.
Maybe.
I would
That'd
love
be
it.
Cool. All right. Anyway.
Don't roast me for my pronunciation, though.
That's
Because,
fine.
I tried. I tried, okay? I made an effort. You didn't want me to, and I did.
Yep. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. And then I got it knocked, and I started going,
Ridiculous.
all those tearjerker.
Hey, we're gonna go on a cruise this summer. You should come with us.